The amber lights of the Azuran High Council chamber cast long shadows across the polished obsidian floor as Ambassador Eleanor Powell led the human delegation through the massive arched entryway. Junior Attaché Lance Harrington adjusted his formal diplomatic collar, fighting the nervous twitch in his left hand. This was his first major interstellar assignment, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Earth desperately needed this non-aggression pact with the Azuran Empire. "Remember," Powell whispered, without turning his head, "maintain eye contact with the Empress, but never for more than 3 seconds. And for God's sake, don't smile. They interpret it as a prelude to attack." Lance nodded, scanning the chamber. Towering Azurans lined the walls, their scaled skin shifting between deep purple and midnight blue in the fluctuating light. Their ceremonial armor glinted with precious metals, and each wore the emblem of their house proudly displayed on elaborate shoulder guards. 12 high counselors sat at a crescent-shaped table of what appeared to be petrified wood, facing the imperial dais, where the Empress would soon appear. "The Azurans have ruled this sector for 9 centuries," Powell had explained during their approach to the capital world. "They've absorbed 17 sentient species into their empire, and they've done it through a combination of technological superiority and the strategic deployment of their war beasts." Now, standing in the Grand Chamber, Lance observed massive alcoves built into the walls, sealed with transparent force fields. Behind each barrier paced one of the infamous Azuran war beasts, enormous 6-limbed predators with scaled hides and multiple rows of serrated teeth. Lance had studied the creatures extensively in his diplomatic briefings, but seeing them in person sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. The beasts were living symbols of imperial might, genetically engineered over centuries to be the perfect apex predators and the perfect instruments of Azuran dominance. A sonorous tone reverberated through the chamber, and the assembled Azurans immediately dropped to one knee. Ambassador Powell gestured for the human delegation to bow at the waist as a procession of imperial guards entered their armor, more ornate than the others in the room. At their center walked Empress Varun. Lance had seen images of her, but they hadn't captured her imposing presence. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her scales a rare iridescent blue that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. Her eyes, 4 of them arranged in a diamond pattern, were a startling amber that contrasted with her skin. The imperial crown resembled intertwined metallic vines, studded with pulsing bioluminescent stones that matched the rhythm of her breathing. "Rise," her voice commanded, and Lance noted how it carried perfectly throughout the chamber, despite its soft volume. "We welcome Earth's representatives to the heart of our empire." Ambassador Powell stepped forward and performed the precise sequence of greeting gestures they had rehearsed countless times. "Empress Varun, sovereign of the 17 worlds, guardian of the eternal flame, we bring greetings from Earth's unified council. We come seeking peaceful accord between our civilizations." The Empress inclined her head slightly. "Your journey across the void speaks to your sincerity. The Azuran Empire acknowledges Earth's growing influence among the younger worlds. It is prudent that we establish clear boundaries." A tall Azuran, with elaborately scarred facial scales, stepped forward from beside the Empress's throne. His ceremonial armor bore more battle markings than anyone else in the room. "I am High Counselor Dravik," he announced. "Before we consider any accord, it is customary that visitors understand the foundation of Azuran sovereignty." Lance noticed Ambassador Powell's shoulders tense slightly. This hadn't been in the briefing. Dravik made a gesture, and one of the force fields containing a war beast dissipated. The creature, larger than Lance had anticipated easily, the size of an earth elephant, stalked forward into the center of the chamber, its multiple eyes scanning the delegation. Its scales were a deep crimson, and muscle rippled beneath them with every movement. "The Carthax war beasts have been our companions in conquest for 7 generations, Dravik explained, with evident pride. "Their loyalty, their ferocity, these qualities reflect the Azuran spirit. To know our empire, one must first understand our beasts." The creature's tail lashed back and forth as it circled closer to the human delegation. Ambassador Powell maintained perfect composure, but Lance could see the other human diplomats edging backward. The beast's handler, a severe-looking Azuran with specialized sonic equipment attached to his armor, stood nearby with a control device in his hand. "This is Makor," the handler announced. "He has tasted the blood of rebels on 9 worlds." Lance's heart hammered in his chest as the beast drew closer, its scent musky and metallic. This was clearly a demonstration of power, a reminder of what could happen should diplomatic relations collapse. Without warning, the beast let out a bone-shaking roar and lunged toward the humans. The delegation scattered diplomats, diving out of the way, as the massive creature charged directly at Lance, who had frozen in place. The beast handler frantically manipulated his control device, but Makor seemed to have overridden the sonic controls through sheer rage. Lance knew he should run, but his legs wouldn't respond. As the beast closed the distance, an unfamiliar calm washed over him. Instead of screaming, he found himself speaking not speaking exactly, but producing a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very bottom of his chest. The effect was instantaneous. Makor skidded to a halt merely feet from Lance, his multiple eyes blinking in what appeared to be confusion. The war beast's aggressive posture melted away, and to the astonishment of everyone in the chamber, the creature lowered its massive head and emitted a sound that resembled a purr. A stunned silence fell over the council chamber. Lance maintained the low-frequency sound, hardly believing what was happening. The beast handler stared in shock, his control device forgotten in his hand. Empress Varun rose slowly from her throne, all 4 eyes fixed on Lance. "Impossible," she murmured, though her voice still carried throughout the silent chamber. No outsider has ever calmed a war beast without technological assistance. High Counselor Dravik's face contorted in what Lance interpreted as disbelief, or possibly anger. "A trick," he declared. "Some Earth technology we did not detect." "No," Lance managed to say, still maintaining the low resonance in his voice. "No technology. I don't understand it either." The Empress descended from her dais, approaching Lance and the now docile Makor, with measured steps. Her guards moved to intercept her, but she waved them away. "What is your name, human?" she asked. "Lance Harrington Jr., Attaché, Your Majesty." The Empress studied him for a long moment, then turned to Ambassador Powell. "Your diplomatic delegation will withdraw to their quarters. Negotiations are suspended." Before Powell could protest, she added, "This man will remain. I would speak with him privately." Powell's face remained diplomatically neutral, but Lance could read the concern in his eyes. "Your Majesty, Attaché Harrington, is an essential member of our delegation. His expertise is now of particular interest to me," the Empress interrupted. "He will be treated with all diplomatic courtesy, Ambassador, but he will remain." Lance swallowed hard, looking between Powell and the Empress. The beast Makor was still standing placidly beside him, occasionally nudging his hand as if seeking contact. "I'll be fine, Ambassador," Lance said with more confidence than he felt. "Perhaps this is an opportunity to demonstrate Earth's goodwill." Powell clearly wasn't happy, but he recognized an imperial command when he heard one. With a formal bow to the Empress, he led the rest of the delegation from the chamber, leaving Lance alone among the Azurans. "Tesseric," the Empress addressed the beast handler, "return Makor to his enclosure." The handler approached cautiously, eyeing Lance with undisguised suspicion. "The beast may not respond to controls after this interference." "Then the human will assist you," Empress Varun replied. Lance realized she was testing him. Maintaining the low resonance in his voice, he gently placed a hand on Makor's scaled flank and guided the massive creature back toward its alcove. The war beast followed docilely, much to the obvious amazement of the assembled council members. Once the force field was reactivated, Empress Varun addressed the council. "This session is concluded. High Counselor Dravik will oversee state matters until my return." She gestured to Lance. "You will accompany me now." Lance followed the Empress and her guards through corridors of increasing opulence. The architecture of the imperial palace was unlike anything on Earth. Organic curves melded seamlessly with crystalline structures, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse with subtle bioluminescence. They eventually arrived at a massive door, comprised of what appeared to be living vines, intertwined with metallic filaments. "My private sanctuary," the Empress explained as the door parted. "Few outsiders have ever been permitted entry." The space beyond was breathtaking, a vast chamber, with a transparent ceiling that revealed the swirling nebula for which the Azuran capital world was famous. Living plants grew throughout the room in artistic arrangements, some species recognizable to Lance, others utterly alien. Soft, golden light emanated from floating orbs that drifted lazily through the air. At the far end of the sanctuary, behind another transparent force barrier, was an enormous warbeast. Even larger than Makor, this creature's scales were an iridescent black that absorbed and refracted light in hypnotic patterns. Multiple scars crossed its hide, testament to a violent past. "This is Caryx," the Empress said. "The most formidable of our warbeasts, and the most intractable. He has killed 3 handlers this year alone." Lance felt a chill run down his spine. "Why keep him if he's so dangerous?" "His lineage is unparalleled. His genetic material is too valuable to waste." The Empress moved toward a control panel. "I wish to see your ability again. Properly this time." "Your Majesty, I don't fully understand what happened in the council chamber. I'm not sure I can replicate it." "For your sake, I hope that you can." She manipulated the controls, and the force barrier containing Caryx began to shimmer. "The barrier will remain partially active enough to prevent physical attack, but allowing sound to pass through unimpeded." Lance approached the barrier cautiously. Caryx immediately sensed his presence, rising to his full height and emitting a roar that Lance felt in his bones. He fought the instinct to flee and instead closed his eyes, focusing on recreating the resonant frequency he had produced earlier. It took several attempts, but eventually he found it a deep thrumming sound that seemed to connect with something primal within him. He opened his eyes to see Caryx watching him intently, the beast's aggressive posture gradually relaxing. Lance maintained the sound, walking closer to the barrier. Caryx approached from the other side, his massive head lowering until it was level with Lance's face. To Lance's amazement, the creature began to emit a purring sound that harmonized with his own vocalizations. The Empress watched in silence, her 4 eyes unblinking. "In 9 centuries, she finally said, no non-Azuran has ever been able to communicate with our warbeasts without technological assistance. Yet you do so with nothing but your voice." Lance let the resonant sound fade, and Caryx remained calm. "I can't explain it, Your Majesty. I didn't know I could do this until today. Humans are full of surprises, it seems." She approached and stood beside him, studying Caryx. "You understand that this ability makes you politically significant?" Lance nodded slowly. "The warbeasts are central to Azuran power and culture. If humans can influence them naturally, it could be perceived as a threat," she finished. "Which is why I removed you from public view so quickly. There are factions within my court who would view your ability as earth sorcery, a prelude to conquest." "That's not our intention," Lance insisted. "Earth genuinely seeks peaceful relations with the Azuran Empire." "Perhaps." The Empress turned away from the barrier. "You will remain in the palace. I wish to conduct further tests over the coming days. Your ambassador will be informed that you are assisting with special cultural exchanges." "Ambassador Powell won't be pleased." "Ambassador Powell has no choice in the matter." A hint of amusement colored her voice. "You have stumbled into imperial politics, Lance Harrington. Tread carefully." Guards escorted Lance to luxurious guest quarters, not far from the Empress's sanctuary. Though ostensibly treated as an honored guest, he wasn't fooled by the opulence. He was effectively a captive, albeit a comfortable one. The following morning, Ambassador Powell was permitted a brief visit. The older diplomat paced Lance's quarters, clearly agitated. "This is unprecedented," Powell said. She's effectively holding you hostage. I'm not sure that's her intention, Lance replied. She seems genuinely curious about my ability with the war beasts. Of course she is. The beasts are the foundation of Azuran military dominance. If humans can control them naturally without technology. Powell shook his head. You're either an extreme diplomatic liability, or our greatest asset, and I'm not sure which yet. Lance explained what had happened in the Empress's sanctuary with Carrix. Powell listened intently, his expression growing more concerned. Be careful, Lance. Court factions are already whispering about Earth witchcraft and espionage. High Counselor Dravik, in particular, seems disturbed by your ability. The Empress doesn't seem to share their concerns. The Empress is inscrutable like all Azurans. Don't mistake curiosity for alliance. Powell lowered his voice. Remember why we're here. Earth needs this non-aggression pact. Without it, we're vulnerable to embargo or worse. Whatever happens, don't compromise our mission. After Powell's departure, Lance was summoned back to the Empress's sanctuary. This time, he found another Azuran present, the beast handler from the council chamber. This is Tessaric, the Empress introduced him. He has trained war beasts for 3 decades and serves as my master of beasts. Tessaric made no effort to hide his disdain. The Empress wishes me to observe your technique. His scaled hand rested on the sonic control device at his belt, a not-so-subtle reminder of where real power lay. Over the next hour, Lance demonstrated his ability with Carrix again, and then with 2 other war beasts that were brought to the sanctuary. Each time the result was the same. His resonant voice calmed the creatures and established a strange rapport that even Tessaric couldn't deny. Explain the biological mechanism, Tessaric demanded after the 3rd demonstration. I can't, Lance admitted. I have no formal training in xenobiology. I only know that it works. Convenient, Tessaric muttered. The Empress dismissed the Beastmaster and gestured for Lance to join her in a small seating area, surrounded by exotic flowering plants. Tessaric has served me faithfully for many years, she said, but like many Azurans, he fears what he does not understand. And you don't? Lance asked before he could stop himself. To his surprise, the Empress's facial scales shifted in what he recognized as the Azuran equivalent of a smile. Fear is a luxury sovereigns cannot afford, Lance Harrington. I must understand before I judge. For the first time, Lance noticed something vulnerable in her posture. Despite her imposing physique and absolute authority, Empress Varun carried the weight of her empire in every movement. Tell me of Earth, she said unexpectedly. Not the diplomatic version. Tell me what it is to be human. Lance found himself speaking about his homeworld, with an openness that surprised him, describing Earth's oceans and forests, its diversity of cultures, the painful history of human conflicts, and the hard-won unity that had finally allowed them to reach the stars. The Empress listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed genuine curiosity rather than political calculation. As their conversation deepened, Lance took a risk. May I ask about Azura, Your Majesty? Not the Empire, but your experience of it. He expected rebuke, but instead, the Empress began to share insights into Azuran society, their complex family structures, their reverence for ancestral accomplishments, their belief that strength existed to protect, not merely to dominate. She spoke of her own ascension to the throne, following her predecessor's assassination, and the constant vigilance required to maintain imperial stability. The war beasts, she explained, are more than weapons. They are the living embodiment of our covenant with power. We do not simply wield strength, we form alliances with it. That is why your ability disturbs many of my counselors. It suggests that humans might form these same alliances more naturally than we do. Their conversation continued until the capital world's sun began to set, painting the nebula outside with spectacular colors. As Lance was escorted back to his quarters, he realized that for those hours, He had forgotten he was speaking with the sovereign of 17 worlds, and had simply engaged with another sentient being, curious about his experiences and willing to share her own. Over the next several days, Lance was summoned to the sanctuary repeatedly. Each time he demonstrated his ability with different war beasts, some docile, others notoriously aggressive. Each time the Empress observed carefully, asking questions that betrayed a mind far more scientific than spiritual. Occasionally, High Counselor Dravik or Tesarik would be present, their skepticism and hostility barely concealed. During his 6th visit to the sanctuary, Lance noticed something odd, small devices positioned throughout the chamber that hadn't been there previously. They were expertly camouflaged among the living plants, but his diplomatic training had made him observant. When they were alone, he casually asked the Empress about them. Her 4 eyes narrowed. "What devices do you refer to?" Lance pointed out several of the hidden objects. The Empress examined one, then straightened with obvious anger. "Sonic disruptors," she said. "Designed to aggravate the war beast's auditory sensitivity." She carefully removed the device. "Someone wishes to ensure your demonstrations fail, perhaps catastrophically." That evening, after returning to his quarters, Lance heard a soft chime at his door. He opened it to find Captain Corzan, the head of the Empress's personal guard, standing outside. "The Empress requests your presence," Corzan said, discreetly. Lance followed the captain through dimly lit service corridors he hadn't known existed. They eventually emerged near the Imperial kitchens, where the captain guided him through a hidden passage that led to a small, sparsely furnished chamber. Empress Varun was waiting, dressed not in her usual formal regalia, but in simple attire that might belong to any high-born Azuran. Without her crown and ceremonial armor, she seemed somehow both less imposing and more present. "Forgive the subterfuge," she said. "It seems there are ears and eyes throughout my palace, even in places I believe secure." Lance nodded toward Captain Corzan. "You trust him?" "With my life, and frequently do." She gestured for Lance to sit. "I believe High Counselor Dravik and Beastmaster Tesarik are plotting treason." Lance absorbed this. "The sonic disruptors. A small part of a larger scheme. My spies report unusual movements of loyalist troops, and Dravik has been holding private audiences with provincial governors." She leaned forward. "In 3 days, I must participate in the sovereignty ceremony, a ritual where the Empress walks among the war beasts without technological protection, demonstrating our ancestral bond." "And they'll use that opportunity to strike," Lance realized. "If the beasts attack you, it would be seen as a rejection of my right to rule." In the ensuing chaos, Dravik could seize power as the Empire's savior. Her eyes met his. "I need your help, Lance Harrington. Not as a diplomat, but as the only being who might prevent this coup." "What about Ambassador Powell? Earth could offer security assistance." "And confirm the conspirators' claims that I am a puppet of Earth interests." She shook her head. "No, this must be resolved internally, or the Empire will fracture." Lance thought carefully. "If Dravik and Tesarik are planning to use sonic disruptors during the ceremony, we need to locate and neutralize them beforehand. My loyal guards are already searching, but the Imperial Hall is vast, and the disruptors are easily hidden." "Then we don't try to find them all," Lance suggested. "Instead, we prepare a countermeasure." An idea began to form. "Your Majesty, how many war beasts participate in the sovereignty ceremony?" "All 12 of the Royal Guardians." "And they're all in the hall at once?" "Yes. It is meant to be an overwhelming display of Imperial connection to our greatest strength." Lance leaned forward. "Then we need to use their planned betrayal against them. I have an idea, but it will require perfect timing and your absolute trust." The two spent hours developing their counter-strategy, with Captain Corzan occasionally offering tactical refinements. By the time Lance returned to his quarters through the secret passages, dawn was breaking over the capital city. The next morning, Ambassador Powell visited again, clearly agitated. "The treaty negotiations are stalled," he reported. "Dravik keeps finding new objections to the proposed terms. Lance, what exactly is happening between you and the Empress? Lance chose his words carefully. We've developed a rapport. She's fascinated by my ability with the war beasts. Rapport. Powell raised an eyebrow. There are rumors circulating among the diplomatic corps. Some suggest that your private audiences go beyond scientific curiosity. Lance felt his face flush. The Empress and I have discussed many things. Earth Azura, our respective cultures. Be careful, Powell interrupted. Interspecies relationships are complex enough without adding imperial politics to the mix. Remember, our priority is securing that treaty. The treaty may be the least of our concerns right now, Lance admitted, then briefed Powell on the suspected coup plot. The ambassador paled. If Dravik seizes power, any hope of an Earth Azuran Accord is dead. He's made no secret of his expansionist views. Exactly why we need to ensure the Empress retains her throne. Powell looked skeptical. And you think your voice alone can prevent this coup? Not alone, Lance said. But as part of a carefully orchestrated plan, yes. The day of the sovereignty ceremony arrived. The Imperial Hall, a space 3 times larger than the council chamber, was filled with Azuran nobility, military officers, diplomatic representatives, and provincial governors. Ornate balconies surrounded the central floor, where 12 massive war beasts were held in force field enclosures, arranged in a perfect circle. Ambassador Powell and the Earth delegation were given prominent seats in one of the lower balconies. Lance, however, was positioned near the imperial entrance from where the Empress would make her ceremonial approach. High Counselor Dravik presided over the opening rituals, his ornate armor glinting in the shaft of natural light that poured through the hall's crystalline ceiling. His voice carried throughout the space as he recited the ancient words of imperial succession. For 9 centuries, the bond between sovereign and beast has been the foundation of our might. Today, Empress Varun reaffirms this sacred covenant before all witnesses. Lance scanned the crowd, noting Tasaric's position near the beast control station. The Master of Beasts occasionally touched the sonic device at his belt, a nervous tell that confirmed their suspicions. Captain Korzan and his most trusted guards were strategically positioned throughout the hall, watching for Lance's signal. A sonorous tone announced the Empress's arrival. She entered in full imperial regalia, the living crown upon her head, pulsing in time with the heartbeat of the empire itself. As tradition dictated, she carried no weapons or technology, standing before her subjects as the embodiment of Azuran sovereignty. Dravik approached and bowed deeply. Too deeply, Lance thought the gesture bordering on mockery. Empress Varun, sovereign of the 17 worlds, guardian of the eternal flame. Do you come to renew the covenant of beast and throne? I do, the Empress replied, her voice strong and clear. Then let the beast judge your worthiness. Dravik raised his arms, and on cue the force fields containing the 12 war beasts began to shimmer and fade. Lance tensed, watching Tasaric closely. The Master of Beasts made a subtle adjustment to his sonic device, and immediately Lance could see the change in the war beasts' behavior. As they were released from their enclosures, instead of moving calmly into the ceremonial formation, they began to pace aggressively, their scales bristling and changing color in patterns that indicated rising aggression. The crowd murmured in concern. This was not how the ceremony was supposed to proceed. The beasts should have formed an honor guard around the Empress. Instead, they were circling like predators assessing prey. Dravik's voice cut through the growing tension. The beasts sense weakness, Your Majesty. Perhaps your right to rule is not as divine as tradition claims. The Empress stood her ground as the war beasts drew closer. Her eyes met Lance's briefly, the signal they had arranged. Lance stepped forward into the open space of the hall. The beasts sense deception, High Counselor, but not from the Empress. Dravik turned his face, contorting with fury. Remove this human from the sacred ceremony. Before anyone could act, Lance drew a deep breath and projected his voice across the entirety of the vast hall. The resonant frequency he had discovered emerged stronger than ever before, amplified by the perfect acoustics of the imperial architecture. The sound washed over the war beasts, and as one they halted their aggressive approach. Impossible! Tesseract shouted frantically, adjusting his sonic device. The disruptor should override any calming influence. Lance maintained the resonant tone, walking slowly toward the center of the hall, where the Empress stood. The war beasts, rather than attacking, began to follow him, forming the very honor guard they were meant to provide for the Empress. What you are witnessing, the Empress announced to the stunned assembly, is not Earth sorcery, but the exposure of treason. High Counselor Dravik and Beastmaster Tesseract planted sonic disruptors throughout this hall, intending to turn our sacred guardians against me and seize Imperial power in the chaos that would follow. Captain Corzan gave a signal, and his loyal guards moved swiftly to apprehend Tesseract. Other guards surrounded Dravik, who had drawn a concealed weapon. Lies! Dravik shouted. The human has bewitched the beasts. This is an Earth plot to control our empire. One of the largest war beasts, Lance recognized it as Caryx, approached Dravik slowly. The High Counselor raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Caryx emitted a deafening roar. Dravik froze, and in that moment of hesitation, the guards disarmed him. Lance guided the war beasts into a formal arrangement around the Empress, continuing his resonant vocalization. She stepped forward, her hand outstretched toward Caryx. The massive beast lowered its head in submission, and a collective gasp rose from the assembled Azurans. The covenant between beast and throne stands unbroken, the Empress declared, and strengthened now through understanding that transcends even the boundaries between our species. The hall erupted in sounds of affirmation as Dravik and Tesseract were led away by the guards. Lance gradually let his resonant tone fade, and to his relief, the war beasts remained calm, responsive now to the Empress's subtle gestures. Ambassador Powell made his way through the crowd to Lance's side. Well done, he murmured, though I suspect this wasn't in any diplomatic handbook. Improvisation is an underrated diplomatic skill, Lance replied with a smile. The aftermath of the failed coup unfolded rapidly. Dravik's co-conspirators were identified and arrested. The Empress convened an emergency session of the High Council, where she named Captain Corzan as the new High Counselor in recognition of his loyalty. A young but promising beast handler named Kelrax was elevated to replace Tesseract as Master of Beasts. 2 days later, the Empress summoned Lance and Ambassador Powell to her throne room, where the full High Council was assembled. The Azuran Empire acknowledges its debt to Earth, she declared formally. Through the actions of Junior Attaché Lance Harrington, Imperial stability was preserved, and a sacred trust deepened. Ambassador Powell stepped forward. The Earth Unified Council is pleased to have been of service, Your Majesty. If I might suggest, this moment of cooperation presents an ideal opportunity to finalize our diplomatic accord. The Empress's scales shifted, in what Lance now recognized as amusement. Indeed, Ambassador. My counselors have reviewed your proposed treaty and found it acceptable with minor amendments. Lance watched as the two senior diplomats exchanged formal documents, hardly believing that the mission's objective had been achieved so suddenly. The non-aggression pact, which had seemed in jeopardy just days ago, was now signed with terms even more favorable to Earth than they had originally proposed. As the formal proceedings concluded, the Empress addressed Lance directly. Junior Attaché Harrington, your unique abilities have opened new possibilities for understanding between our species. The Azuran Empire would be honored if you would consider accepting a permanent diplomatic post here on our capital world, as a liaison specifically focused on cultural and biological exchange. Ambassador Powell looked startled. Your Majesty, while we appreciate the offer, Attaché Harrington is a valuable member of Earth's diplomatic corps, with numerous assignments awaiting him. Of course, the Empress replied smoothly. The decision must be his to make. Lance found himself at the center of attention, aware that his response would have far-reaching implications. A permanent post on Azura would be unprecedented. No human had ever been offered such a position within the Empire. There were obvious diplomatic advantages, but he also recognized the personal dimension of the Empress's offer. During their private conversations in the sanctuary, something had developed between them, a connection that transcended mere political alliance. He had glimpsed the person behind the imperial facade, and she had seen him not just as a representative of Earth, but as an individual worthy of trust. "I would be honored to accept this position, Your Majesty," Lance said finally. "With the Earth Unified Council's approval, of course." Powell didn't look pleased, but he was too experienced a diplomat to show it openly. "I will convey your request to the Council, along with my recommendation that it be approved in light of recent developments." That evening, Lance found himself on a balcony overlooking the Azuran capital city, its bioluminescent architecture creating patterns of light that rivaled the nebula overhead. He heard soft footsteps and turned to find the Empress approaching once again, dressed in the simpler attire she had worn during their clandestine meeting. "I hoped I would find you here," she said. "This view has always helped me think clearly." "It's breathtaking," Lance agreed. "Though I imagine the demands of ruling 17 worlds leaves little time for contemplation." "Perhaps that will change now." She moved to stand beside him, closer than Imperial protocol would normally permit. "Your acceptance of the liaison position will establish a precedent, Lance Harrington. Never before has a non-Azuran held such a position of influence within our empire." "I'm aware of the responsibility it entails." "And the personal implications." Her 4 eyes met his gaze directly. "I am not unaware of the rumors circulating about our private audiences." Lance smiled. "Diplomacy always involves some degree of personal connection, Your Majesty." "Varun," she corrected him. "When we are alone, at least I would hear my name, not my title." Below them, in a large garden adjacent to the palace, several war beasts roamed freely, their movements peaceful under the stars. One of them, Lance recognized Carrick's by his distinctive scale patterns, looked up toward the balcony and emitted a soft, almost musical sound. "They sense your presence," Varun said. "Already they associate you with safety, with harmony." "Perhaps that's what our species can offer each other," Lance suggested. "Humans have struggled through our history to find balance between strength and compassion. The Azuran Empire has mastered the art of power, but even you admit that understanding sometimes eludes you. A partnership of complementary virtues." Varun's hand moved to rest beside his on the balcony rail, not quite touching, but close enough that Lance could feel the warmth of her scales. "That would be unprecedented indeed." "I've found that unprecedented circumstances often lead to the most promising futures," Lance replied. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city below and the stars above. The challenges ahead were numerous: cultural barriers to overcome, political factions to navigate, the skepticism of both their peoples to address. Yet, in this moment, with the war beasts resting peacefully below and the vastness of space stretched out above, Lance felt a profound sense of possibility. The bond that had formed between him and Varun, between human and Azuran, represented something larger than either of them, a bridge between civilizations that had developed in isolation, but now stood to benefit from shared wisdom. His unexpected ability with the war beasts had been merely the catalyst for a deeper understanding. As the largest moon of the Azuran world rose over the horizon, casting its amber light across the city, Varun's hand finally moved to cover his, a gesture as politically significant as it was personally meaningful. "To new beginnings," she said softly. "And to the harmony they might bring," Lance replied. Below, the war beasts looked up at the balcony once more, as if sensing the moment's importance. Their peaceful presence was a living testimony to the power of understanding across the boundaries of species, and a promise of what might yet be possible between worlds.